Hello, welcome to my YouTube's channel. I got distracted by my water. My name is Elena. I'm getting hungry. Side note, I sit down and record 4 videos at a time. So I pre-record my videos for a month at a time. And I am starting to get very hungry. So after this, it's lunchtime. All right. Whew. Hi, my name is Elena. Welcome to my YouTube channel. On this channel, we review books. And we talk about books, one book at a time typically, and we do a deep dive. So this week's book review is so exciting. My Brilliant Friend by the icon, the legend, the myth, Elena Ferrante. Let's put this here. I'm so chuffed. I no longer have to hold books. Okay. Ooh, this was one of my most anticipated reads of the year. It did not disappoint. The hype is worth it. Let's dive in. I feel no nostalgia for our childhood. It was full of violence. I'm getting hungry. All right. My Brilliant Friend by, like I said, the icon, the legend, Elena Ferrante, is told from the perspective of Elena. I don't think she did it on purpose. Because Elena Ferrante is actually the pen name. We don't know who she is. You know what? That's the way to go. Side note. Pen name and like go incognito. Smart lady. So Elena is from a poor neighborhood in Naples. And in this first installment of the Neapolitan Quartet, so this is book 1 of 4, hence quartet, Elena tells a story of what it was like to be an adolescent during this time. Its social dynamics, the colorful people in her community, and most importantly, she focuses on her closest friend, Lila. Lila is a trip with no luggage, but we'll get to Lila later. This is also a Naples that is post-World War II. And so the country Italy is going through a lot of change, being on the fresh end of having lost a war, the most destructive war ever. Hopefully it remains the most destructive war ever, but people are going to people. All right, I'm getting hungry. So Elena is our narrator, and she does not shy away from the difficulties of her childhood. She's no stranger to violence. And there is also a lot of domestic issues that occur in this book within the family and amongst rival families. Our world was like that, full of words that killed: coup, tetanus, typhus, gas, war, lathe, rubble, work, bombardment, bomb, tuberculosis, infection. With these words and those years, I bring back the many fears that accompanied me all my life. So what I find interesting about My Brilliant Friend, so yes, obviously, it's very early on in the novel where you figure out this may not be the cheeriest novel, the topics discussed and what's touched on. Yes, they're difficult topics, but it's really elegantly done. While reading this book, I did not ever once feel burdened, even though there were a couple times, maybe certain instances or certain plot points you come across, you're like, ooh, that sucks. But it just never feels, to me at least, heavy. But also, I'm not the best gauge because it takes me a lot to feel like really bogged down by a book. For me, I used A Little Life as the litmus test. A Little Life, as gruesome as it was, for me was like, okay, a walk in the park. A Little Life was a walk in the park for me, content-wise. So I'm not a good litmus test here, but so maybe there are things in this book that would bother other people, but for me, I was not burdened by this book at all. But I still think it's because it's written a certain way. It's not heavy, and it's just, it's done in a way, ironically, she says, the narrator saying she has no nostalgia for her childhood, but something about it still feels nostalgic. And it takes a talented writer to straddle that fine line between being blunt, but not being gory or voyeuristic, or writing something just because, just for the sake of getting a reaction out of the reader. That is not what is happening here. So due to this difficult environment, Yelena and her friend Lila concoct ways to get out of their troubled environment, and these girls daydream about how to obtain this exit. And at first it's through education. So Yelena and Lila are actually two of the smartest cookies in their class. And they also both love books and they love reading and learning. And Lila is so intelligent, she can teach herself many, many topics and does teach herself many things. However, so they see education and becoming future writers as a way to get out. However, as the story progresses and life happens and these girls get older, this book starts actually where they're in the single digits. I would guess maybe 8 or 9 years old. Life does begin to interfere with these plans, and just life happens, and so other decisions are made. Trained by our school books to speak with great skill about what we had never seen, we were excited by the invisible. So my brilliant friend begins with, again, Yelena. Yelena is another character in a different book. Elena, recounting her youth, again, starting from those single digits, so about 8, 9 years old, up to the teenage years is what this book covers. So I would say about 16, 17 years old. So in a way, one could read this book as a coming of age story because we're witnessing Yelena is not in this book. Yelena is an American ending. Go watch that review. So we're witnessing Elena and her peers go from those really awkward stages of puberty and adolescence. Go through those awkward phases of puberty and adolescence, and the effect that this has on one's own identity. I mean, I think we can all relate. If you're watching this and you've been past puberty, we can all relate to how Yelena. Two different cultures here. Yelena was Russian American. Elena discusses how she feels awkward with her changing body. Puberty is a beast, is it not? Puberty was a lot. I'm so glad I don't have to. Once it's over, you're like, oh, I'm so glad that was done. Do you ever remember? Okay, another thing that you often forget, side note, how uncomfortable it was when you started losing your teeth start falling out, your baby teeth falling out to be replaced by adult teeth. Annoying. When I look at a young child and they're starting to lose teeth, I'm like, ooh, that was not a fun time. Growing up maturing physically is often, it's so uncomfortable. Anyway, so you really relate to, if you're past puberty and all those awkward years, the acne, the changing body, how unphysically uncomfortable that is. You're awkward and gangly. How, for a lot of people, puberty can actually physically hurt because you're growing so fast. I kid you not. When I was going through puberty, I was getting noticeably taller. Like, my mom would say a month would pass. She's like, you got taller. It physically hurts. Like, my joints would ache. Ugh. Anyway, so Elena, is dealing with this awkwardness in her changing body. And also, as she gets older and she matures into her late teens, she realizes that her interests are different, and what she likes is different, her goals are different, and she becomes increasingly at odds with her peers. And she does increasingly become at odds with Lila because Lila takes a different path than what Elena wants. As soon as I could, I locked myself in the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror, naked. I no longer knew who I was. I felt at the mercy of obscure forces acting inside my body. I was always agitated. Relatable. I began to be made unhappy with my own alienness. I had grown up with these boys. I considered their behavior normal. Their violent language was mine. But for 6 years now, I had been following daily a path that they were completely ignorant of, and in the end, I had confronted it brilliantly. With them, I couldn't use any of what I learned every day. I had to suppress myself. So Elena decides to continue to pursue school, which many of her peers at this time are not doing. Even Lila doesn't go that far in school, regardless of how smart she is. So Elena goes through middle school and even high school. She could even think about university, whereas that's just unheard of in her neighborhood. And so because she's being exposed to way more things, she's learning different languages, Latin, Greek, Italian inside of her local language and dialect. She is beginning to be separated from her peers and her own family because she's pursuing higher education, and thus her exposure is just way different. And so all of that is very odd when you're growing up and when you're, in some cases it may not necessarily be cool, you're the bookish one or whatever. And so all of that is also culminates with her changing body and the awkwardness of puberty. So, like I said earlier, really, I would say the biggest focus of My Brilliant Friend is Lila, who is really Elena's best friend. Lila is a bit of an enigma. If you've read this book, Lila is a trip with no luggage. And so Elena spends the whole duration of this novel, Lila is introduced very early on in the story, discussing Lila's character, her personality, Elena's own internal competition with Lila. It's an odd friendship. Lila, like I said, is an interesting character. And given that this is the first of 4 novels, I can only imagine what goes on. So actually the story, the opening chapter of this book starts with Elena as an adult. And something has happened with Lila. We don't know yet. And so in order to make sense of what's happening and why this behavior is not odd for Lila, Elena actually has to go back to the beginning and then build up this character as it goes. So as the novel goes. So we are really just at the tip of the iceberg when it comes to these 2 women, especially Lila. So there's definitely a lot more to come. Lila is not always likable here. She can actually be quite cruel. She is also a very vulnerable character, which is why she's interesting. I'm not going to say, even though I say she's not always likable, I don't dislike her as a character. We don't know everything yet. She's very vulnerable. And Ferrante does an excellent job making this character way more nuanced than she had to. Lila is incredibly intelligent. She taught herself how to read. She taught herself how to write. Even before, she taught herself complicated math. She taught herself other languages. And so, and when she's younger, before she hit puberty, she's a late bloomer. Boys didn't pay attention to her. She was not the prettiest. But as she begins to grow, she physically begins to blossom. And even though she may not be traditionally pretty, Lila, she almost gains a different quality. She is attractive. Yes, she's long and lean and holds herself with a certain type of grace. She does become attractive, but maybe not in the conventional sense. But she also has this, she's abstract, and so because she's abstract, she draws people in. She just has that oomph that other people don't have, and that's why eventually, as she gets older, the young men in this neighborhood just cannot stay away. So she's definitely an interesting character. But again, that vulnerability is what you have to continue to think about, because it becomes clear very early on that Lila is complex, and some of that hardness that she has is also a defense mechanism. And the uneasiness that the discovery of her fragility brought me was transformed by the secret pathways into a need of my own to be superior. To not be second, to outdo her, for the first time seemed to me a success. Because Elena feels that she is constantly in Lila's shadow, but it's just, I think also that just kind of stems from this normal competition that sometimes people can have with each other. I have the impression from the way she used me from the way she handled Stefano, what she was struggling to find, from inside the cage in which she was enclosed, a way of being all her own that was still obscure to her. So again, you can see that, yes, can't get these names right. Lila uses people around her. Again, like I said, she can be quite cruel. She's not always likable, but it's from this place of fragility. And there are points with the narrative you can tell that Lila's worldview begins to disintegrate. And so she's almost having to reconcile how the world actually operates from how she perceived it to have operated. And that's always difficult to kind of come to terms with. She had perceived for the first time unknown entities that broke down the outline of the world and demonstrated its terrifying nature. This had deeply shaken her. So I'm really looking forward to what happens with Lila in particular in the following novels. I have the second one already down here somewhere. So looking forward to this. I can see why this series is so well loved. This is one of those novels that sucks you in. The writing is immaculate, especially given that this is translated. So that means the translator did their job. I can only imagine how this reads in the original Italian. And the premise of this novel is really quite simple, yet it's rather a dynamic, deep story, and at times surprisingly philosophical, especially when you get Elena's conversations about herself and identity and this maturing process that she goes through, this idea of Lila's worldview starting to break down, these outlines that she's talking about. You could take that in some philosophical directions if you really wanted to. I compulsively read this novel. It took me maybe a week to get through it. That's it. Couldn't put it down. And when I wasn't reading it, I was like, can't wait to get back to this book. And when it ended, I was like, I wanted to reread it again while immediately moving on to the next book in the series. But I didn't do that. I got a long TBR. And then at the same time, yes, I wanted to immediately reread it, but it was almost like a comfort to know that there are still 2-3 other books to go. And depending on how my reading goes for the remainder of the year, for the second half of the year, I may try to squeeze in the second book this year. I can see why so many people rave about this book. It works the hype. It's worth the hype. It lingers in your memory. Like, you just can't get enough of these characters and what's happening with these people. It just lingers with you. It's just expertly written. And I also cannot wait to read Elena Ferrante's other works, both fiction and nonfiction. This book is a contender for one of my top reads of the year. I gave it a 5 out of 5, and I am considering adding this book to my favorite contemporary novels list. It's almost hard to describe. Like I said, the premise of the book is not deep, but it's just the way that it is written and the way that these characters are written. It's deep and dynamic, and it doesn't have to be. But she did the thing. Have you read the Neapolitan Quartet? Or are you in the midst of reading the series? If so, please feel free to share your thoughts below. Or is this a series that you have pinned to read? So it's on your TBR. Or are you a person who's like, that you don't get the hype? If so, please feel free to let me know. I don't want to assume that just because it's well liked, you like it. So if this was not your cup of tea, please share it. Please feel free to share why. I would like to know. Also, don't forget to like, subscribe, leave comment. Thanks. Also, please feel free to follow me on Instagram, where I get up to more book of shenanigans and where all of my book content gets posted first. Also, my monthly TBRs and reading wrap-ups get posted there as well. I am going to go on and sign off because your girl is hungry. I'm hungry. It's 2:00 p.m. and I'm hungry. It's time for lunch, a late lunch, but I'm hungry. Gotta go. Bye.